All right. Get the slides up again here. There we go. Okay, well, welcome to the last breakout. I know the room's going to be a little sparse because we have our DFR program manager training going on, but I know could be a big virtual audience. So yeah, thanks for those of you that are here. Thanks for joining online. So I'm going to cover some regulations for DFR, basically. And I'll kind of use this first slide just to introduce myself. I'm Jakey Stoltz, Director of Aviation Regulatory Affairs here at Skydio. And I have the privilege, really, of working with a small but experienced team here on the slide. And between the three of us, we're really just aviation professionals at the end of the day. And we've been working in this industry for a long time. So me personally, I'm a commercial pilot, a CFI, a remote pilot. We got other pilots on the team as well. And I got my first experience actually flying drones back in 2015. So the image on the right here is actually a Christmas card from a regional UAS team that I was part of. Kind of going way back, this was before Part 107. It was kind of in the 333 days, but even a little before that. And you had to have a private pilot certificate or more to even fly small drones. So this law enforcement team and the lead there, I mean, he's kind of thinking way ahead of the curve, but they couldn't require their officers or deputies to go get pilot's license. That was just way too cost prohibitive. And so instead they hired some students and staff out of the university there, and I was fortunate to be one of them. So I spent a couple of years flying with them, and we were basically an on-call unit. We'd go fly. Things were quite basic at that time. We didn't even have photogrammetry, so we would just take pictures of incidents, crime scenes. We'd do some search and rescue or search for fugitives. But yeah, it was amazing. And so it was a really good experience. It helped me get some experience in what you all do every day in public safety and the importance, really, of the job and the mission. And again, kind of fast forwarding a little bit, so I spent a number of years at an FAA UAS test site, and my colleagues have as well before joining Skydio. We've spent a lot of years thinking about airspace awareness and aviation safety, and how do we use these technologies to go beyond visual line of sight and fly remotely. And so kind of between the three of us, we've used just about every type of technology out there. Radars and the electro-optical systems, the acoustic systems, and so on. Kind of one of my favorites was in the upper left picture on the slide here. That's a picture with me and colleagues in front of an MQ-1 Predator, so a bigger surveillance drone. And it's a little crazy, but they actually had to have a chase plane follow them around whenever they would fly this thing in the national airspace. So they were doing training flights and training missions in the US before selling units overseas or operating overseas. And so that had to be done in accordance with the same regulations we're all kind of flying under today. And so they had to have a chase plane following this thing around with a pilot in it and a visual observer, so kind of a two-person crew, and that chase plane would be the eyes for this drone as it flew around. So obviously very cost prohibitive and cumbersome, and so they kind of got our help to get them a beyond visual line of sight approval, and we used an FAA radar to do that. So kind of the big radar is the same radar that air traffic is looking at. We were able to get that data and visualize it and use that for collision avoidance and ultimately remove that chase plane. So yeah, a lot of experience with it. And all this experience has really driven our strategy at Skydio and how we look at getting beyond visual line of sight approvals and helping customers do that. And so we'll hit more on that. But it wouldn't be a regulatory presentation without our Arc of Autonomy. So we always do show this. It's really our regulatory roadmap at the company. So and we've been working at it for many years, and there's more to come. So At this point, we've achieved stage 3 at scale. So this stage is characterized by remote operations now, where the pilot no longer has to be with the drone, but it's in a 1-to-1 ratio. So it's still one pilot flying one drone, but remotely. And so we do have, there's work going on with stage 4, which is what we call multi-mission, or where one pilot can start to fly multiple drones simultaneously. And you saw kind of what that looks like with DFR command yesterday, which we're really excited about. And then stage 5, a little more future-looking and kind of visionary, but we believe at some point, we'll be able to make the pilot optional. So imagine for drone as first responder, the drone is able to at least deploy based on sensors or different inputs, and just deploy autonomously and start to go to that call. But then as it arrives, a pilot can kind of jump in and maybe start to move it around, get the angles they need and the data they need for that particular call. So, all right, and kind of turn that into a little bit more of a metaphor here now. So this idea came to me earlier this year of how do we explain what we do really internally and externally to customers. So the idea of mountaineering came to me, and there's some similarities to what we do, and I'll kind of call out 3 things. So firstly, it takes patience, and so this is something we've, again, been working at for many years, and we're not to the summit yet either, so we're going to keep working that, but it does take patience, and it's just incremental steps as we go. The next thing is it does help to have a guide, and so that's really what we hope to be, is kind of your guide as you're trying to work up this mountain as well. We know certain paths and strategies to take along that journey. And then finally, safety matters for both these things. So climbing a mountain can be dangerous, so you want to take safety precautions. But flying a drone remotely and beyond visual line of sight, if not done correctly at least, can also be dangerous. And so we care deeply about that aviation safety. So come along the journey with me a little bit. So 2021, the FAA, Chula Vista, and Skydio is a partnership to unlock what we now call tactical BVLOS. So this is really a beyond visual line of sight meant for kind of short range, low altitude flying, and it just allowed officers to fly drones in areas where they couldn't see them or still be behind cover while they're flying the drone. And that's now been issued to over 500 agencies, so it's really just taken off. And if you don't have it really at this point, there's no reason not to. So, and you could think of this as as a little bit of a base camp, right? So we're going up the mountain towards Autonomous Summit here, and that was one of the first base camps. Then in 2023, drone as first responder really took off again with Chula Vista, and the concept, from that point really to today, is that there still had to be a visual observer watching the drone and scanning the airspace around the drone during flight. So, we have many agencies doing this today, doing drone as first responder, but it's all characterized by, a VO standing on a rooftop or still maybe on the street, but there's always somebody scanning the airspace. And that has, I think it's clear now, the value of DFR and a lot of this work has shown us that and proved it out, but it's also been hard to scale because of that requirement. So not every agency can put personnel up on rooftops, or they have the budgets to hire contractors to do that job. And so, so it's been really great, but it's also been limited a little bit in scale. So this year, we're really excited now to be breaking some new ground and getting some new pathways to no visual observer DFR. So the first one was a no VO Part 107 waiver that went to Pasco County Sheriff's Office earlier this year. And then on Monday, just very recently now, we announced that New York City Police Department also received a no VO COA to do DFR in their city. And so I'm going to kind of spend the rest of the presentation talking really about those two and these new pathways here. So firstly, for Pasco County, so they received a waiver to 107.31. That's the visual line of sight rule. And today, that enables them to do training and testing at their first facility. So it's a super cool facility they have there in the county where they do a bunch of different work, but that includes some of their drone, where they do testing, they do training, they bring agencies in, share tactics, and so on. And it also allows them to do drone as first responder at their school properties, and really across most of Pasco County. And so they're looking at the schools as kind of that launch point. So the drones can be at the school and respond to any incidents right there at the school themselves. But importantly, this will kind of serve as their launch point for more of a full county implementation of DFR in the future under 107. And so really quickly, kind of what this allows them to do sort of operationally, it allows them to do what we call shielded DFR operations. And so that's operations up to 200 feet AGL kind of generally throughout these areas, or if there are structures that are higher than 200 feet, they can go up and over those, and we call that 50-foot shielding. So it kind of combines both of those two things. That's depicted on the graphic at the top there, and kind of that in green area. It looks a little bit different color on my screen, but the green area is kind of what I'm talking about here. And the great thing about it is it doesn't require VOs, and it only requires ADS-B technology. So there's no other technology that's required here. There's no radars or electro-optical systems or anything like that. So just ADS-B and technology. And I'm going to hit on that again, so I'm going to kind of keep moving here. So New York City Police Department now, they got a slightly different kind of approval. So it's a waiver to 91-113 and 119, or this is kind of commonly referred to as a COA. And this really enables them to do citywide DFR operations. And the image here, the green, is really where they have approval now to do this type of operation. So it's most of the city. The only areas that really aren't included are the areas right around the two major airports there, JFK and LaGuardia. So very wide scale approval. And it allows them to do similar operations. So if this slide looks familiar, it's because it's exactly the same slide. So they are also able to do shielded DFR operations up to 200 feet, just kind of broadly across the city in those green areas that you saw before. And then, maybe unlike Pasco County, New York City does have some taller buildings in it, right? So when they do encounter those, if there's a building along their flight path as they're responding to calls for service, they can just kind of pop that altitude up and get over that building and back onto their call. So it's not just limited to 200 feet. And again, it only requires them to use ADS-B technology. So there's no visual observer on the rooftop. There's no pilot on the rooftop at this point. It's just remote operations. And it's really safe, simple, and scalable with ADS-B. And interestingly enough, this approval actually gives New York City Police Department a second type of operation. I'll just call this kind of a second CONOP, concept of operation. So this approval also allows them to fly up to 400 feet AGL, again, broadly across the city. But in that case, they're required to have ADS-B technology and a non-cooperative detect and avoid system. So they have to have additional airspace awareness technology that's looking out for aircraft and providing that information back to the pilot. So we'll kind of talk about like the differences between these two, and there's pros and cons, and I'll sort of compare those. But for now, we'll just kind of leave it at this, and there's two types of CONOPs that they're able to do. Okay, so the next few slides here, I'm going to kind of go like a level deeper here that we usually don't, but we wanted to kind of give a little peek under the cover and talk about the safety case and some of the the overarching themes and the things that we did to help these two customers get these approvals. So when we help a customer get approval, we think about two things, and these are the two things that the FAA is most concerned about when they're evaluating these requests and deciding to approve or ask questions. And so those two things are airspace safety and citizen safety. And so we'll kind of focus first on airspace safety. So kind of the overarching question here is just how does the pilot avoid collision with other aircraft? So if you're not there and you're not scanning airspace and looking for helicopters or low-flying aircraft, how do you see those things? How do you give way to them? How do you use the technology to do that? And you have to think about it in two ways too. So you have to think about it when things are going well. So the missions are going well, everything's performing correctly, but there's a low-flying aircraft. What do you do? And you also have to think about them in what we call like off-nominal situations. But if something doesn't go well, if you lose link, for example, how do you still avoid an aircraft in that situation? Okay, so first, just the goal. So what is the goal of airspace safety? It's to keep the drone away from other aircraft, or a more technical term, it's to remain well clear of other aircraft. And the New York City Police Department approval actually gave us kind of an updated definition of this. So when you're flying visual line of sight, you're just kind of making a judgment call, and you're looking at an incoming aircraft in your drone, and you're probably just taking kind of a big action to either maybe land it, or maybe it's still far off and not converging. But it's not really based on like numbers. You can't tell if it's 500 feet away or 1,000 feet or a mile. You're just making a judgment call. But when you're flying beyond visual line of sight and you're starting to use technology to avoid aircraft, you actually can start to use some numbers. And so kind of interestingly, the actual numbers, like how far away you have to keep drones from aircraft, are on the right side here. And under 200 foot, we really only have to give way 100 foot vertically and 500 foot to the side. So it's quite a small sort of, we call it like a hockey puck around the drone that you have to keep aircraft out of. When you start flying higher, that number gets bigger. So there's kind of perhaps one advantage to flying lower is that you kind of have a smaller area that you have to maintain clearance from aircraft. And so, okay, so that's the overarching goal, is just to keep aircraft, in our case, flying below 200 feet, 100 foot vertically away from the drone. And so to do this, we use two types of mitigations, so strategic and tactical. So strategic things are like just flying in kind of the right time or place. And then tactical is like using more of the sensors and actually taking actions, maneuvering based on some sensor technology that you're using. Okay, so firstly, we'll kind of talk about strategic mitigation. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, actually, but flying, you'd think New York City, it's this super busy airspace. There's aircraft just all over the place at any given time. And it's true, like there are a lot of aircraft. But when you look closely, it's actually not as chaotic as it might seem. So things are pretty predictable. There's helicopter routes, there's the airports, and aircraft generally fly along these kind of consistent places at certain altitudes. And so it becomes quite predictable. And that's kind of shown in the graphics here. So if you just look at all aircraft flying in and out of that area, at 1,000 feet AGL, there's aircraft kind of everywhere, especially along the rivers and around the airports. But if you start to fly at low altitudes that we do, we fly at 200 feet or below, that's the image on the bottom. There's far less aircraft. And you can start to see that they're in kind of just predictable areas. They're all along the East River, the Hudson River. They're doing tours of the Statue of Liberty. They're flying in and out of the two airports, or they're flying along the shoreline, for example, to kind of come into the rivers. So if you know these things, you can start to kind of plan around it. And when you run some math, actually the just general risk of colliding with an aircraft is very low. So we've done some math, but the probabilities are the same for two things. So being dealt a royal flush in poker, it's the same probability as having a mid-air collision in controlled airspace. So has anybody been dealt a royal flush in here? I don't know. Yeah, so not very good chances. And then, so that's just the general risk. If I just closed my eyes and flew through Manhattan, that would sort of be the probability. But we can further decrease that by avoiding some of these areas. So if we avoid flying over the East River or near the airports or along the shoreline, that number goes even lower. So So that's one kind of big part of it. It's just the risk of collision and flying in the right time and place is just very low. Okay, so now, so that can't be the only mitigation, right? We can't just sort of hope that there won't be that 1 in a million chance, because if you do fly enough hours and there's enough years that go by, that probability might be realized at some point. So we do have additional mitigations, and now we're kind of talking tactical. So for both of these approvals, for both Pasco County and New York City Police Department, they're located in what's called ADS-B out airspace. So in this airspace, aircraft, other aircraft, so crewed aircraft, are required to have ADS-B transmitters. And this means basically that they're broadcasting once a second their altitude, their position, and a bunch of information about their aircraft. And so we can use that information then to make decisions and avoid them. It's not a perfect, it's not 100% compliance. So we do know there's about 2% of operators that either receive approvals to turn it off for security reasons, or maybe the equipment's just not working correctly. That happens. But the percentage is very high, as high as 98%. So, and then even outside of ADS-B airspace, so these two approvals are based on ADS-B airspace, but even outside of that, and this kind of goes into some of the things we're going to continue to be working on. The estimates now are as much as 90% of aircraft are equipped with this technology, and they're broadcasting, and so that just means generally that we receive this data. It's kind of the next thing. So with our X10 and our docks, we have ADS-B receivers that collect this data and put it right on remote flight deck for the pilots to make decisions on. And that's a key thing. So both approvals require the ADS-B to be a local sensor. So it can't be like an internet service like Flight Radar 24 or FlightAware or some of those other systems that agencies might have used in the past. This has to be a local receiver right there at the operating area. And by doing that, we kind of guarantee two things. So we guarantee that we have very good low altitude coverage, and that's the area that we care most about. So everything below, say 1,000 feet, particularly 500 feet, we can just make sure that any aircraft that are broadcasting will be able to receive and display that data. And it also guarantees that we have kind of high performance, so we don't have to worry about latency. That data is all kind of passed through the same link as the drone, and so it's very accurate, very low latency data. And we take this data and we make it easy for pilots to basically kind of know when there's low-flying aircraft near them, and if needed, take action. So firstly, we filter the irrelevant data. So you don't really care about an airline flying overhead at 35,000 feet. It might be cool to know, but it has no safety impact on your operation. So we filter out a lot of that data and we don't show it effectively, so that you don't get kind of overloaded with ADS-B traffic on your map, and it becomes hard to pick out what's a hazard and what's not. So we just filter a lot of that away, make it really clean. And then when a low-flying aircraft does get close enough, we'll alert you. And that's kind of what you see in the graphic on the top. So there's alert in remote flight deck. It's both visual and audible, so it's pretty hard to miss. And that just directs the pilot to, hey, pay attention, there's something low nearby, and then the pilot makes a decision at that point. All right, and now, kind of just switching gears a little bit to non-cooperative detect and avoid sensors. So this kind of goes into reasons, again, I mentioned why we've chosen the strategy that we have. So the other sensors, radars, camera arrays, et cetera, those can be used to detect aircraft that are not broadcasting ADS-B out. So in these particular airspaces of Pasco County and New York City, this would be like the 2% of aircraft, right, that don't have it or have turned it off for security reasons. And so each one of these sensors, if you're an agency kind of thinking about purchasing, deploying these sensors, there's some things you should think about as you're doing that. So each one kind of has some unique things. There's different installation requirements, environmental considerations, range, costs, and so on. So this picture actually here on the bottom is a picture from years ago when we were deploying some of the small panel radars that are common in systems out there. And the picture, it might be a little bit hard to see, but the picture actually shows one helicopter that we knew about. So we were testing this out, so we were typically like standing there and looking as well as using this technology to kind of see how it performed. But this sensor shows one helicopter in this kind of frame, but you can see two targets. And what might not be so clear because it's small is that one target has a confidence of 20%, one has a confidence of 100%, and really the only information that the useful information that you're getting out of this is kind of the location. So it doesn't give you altitude. And so if you're a drone pilot, you're out there doing a mission, responding to a call, this could be difficult to use, right? So you have to interpret this. Like, do I avoid both targets or just one of them? Is the 20% one actually something I need to care about, or is it not? I don't know what altitude it is because the sensor just doesn't have that capability. So it could be co-altitude, it could be the same altitude as me, it could be 1,000 feet in the air. And so these are just the things that you have to kind of think about with these sensors. And the complexity is, again, just reasons why we have, at least today, chosen not to deploy those for these two approvals that we got. But it is an option. So, and there's another thing too. So, think about a city like New York City. So it's a little over, I think 450 square miles. So just an expansive city. And if you had to deploy sensors across that whole city, let's say you wanted to get 100% coverage of your city with a sensor like this. So a lot of these sensors have limited range, and I'll just use one example. Some of these small panel radars or the electro-optical systems, they see about a mile, maybe a mile and a half. And you typically need, for like radars, you need 4 of them to see in a 360-degree view. So imagine a city of 450 square miles, and your one sensor sees about a mile radius. You can kind of do the math. It ends up being a lot of sensors. And then you have to install them. You have to find rooftops or water towers or some kind of tower to put these things on, all over the city. And so the cost and the complexity just like really ramps up if you want to start covering your city with sensors like this. Or if you don't do that, so let's say you don't do full coverage of your city with the sensors, and you maybe just have one sensor at the takeoff and landing point, that then starts to limit your operational capabilities. So if the sensor can see a mile and a half, you can't operate that far. You have to kind of operate within that volume so that you can see something and have time to react. So if you just deploy one, now you're limiting like your operational distance that you can respond to calls and the effectiveness of your system. So, with the shielded DFR operations and just ADS-B, we don't really kind of run into those problems. Like, we don't have to install infrastructure all over the city to collect this data. It's just on the X10. It's very easy to use, so there's no confidence intervals or anything. It comes directly from a GPS source, so it's very high quality data that the pilot can use to make decisions. And so that's kind of just reasons why we've chosen our strategy. So the last thing here is that, okay, so you've deployed these sensors or you're using ADS-B to see aircraft. And so now, if one does fly low and near your area, you might have to take an action. And so low-flying aircraft, just because there are low-flying aircraft nearby doesn't mean you always have to take an action. And so, just for illustrative purposes, we kind of created 3 scenarios. But this goes back to that well-clear definition that I shared earlier. So if a helicopter is flying overhead at 500 feet AGL and you're flying at 200 feet AGL, by those numbers, you actually don't have to maneuver to give way to that. So we've chosen to make these decisions, at least for now, just pilot decisions and based on training and understanding of the system. It's not an automated avoidance maneuver. Because if you start to build in some rules about just do an automated avoidance maneuver if anything is within a mile, you could be doing unnecessary maneuvers that actually add some risk potentially to your operation. So yeah, based on our alerts, the pilot just looks, makes the decision. What altitude is this aircraft at? How far away is it? And then if they need to, they take an action. Okay, so that was all the airspace side of it. So now kind of switching gears to the citizen safety side. So the question here now is, how do you avoid injuring somebody on the ground? And this is mostly in the cases of our off-nominal situations. So if you have to do an emergency landing or for some reason, something like that. So the goal here is just, don't injure somebody. So in some ways, it's a little more simple than the airspace side of it. And so we've got kind of 3 different strategies for how agencies can achieve this and what we use for Pasco County and NYPD. So firstly, the first thing you can do is just kind of avoid it. And so for Pasco County, what that looks like, at least for now, is that they're operating within the boundaries of the school at these properties. And they're using things like flight planning, flying over rooftops, flying over treetops where there's heavy vegetation, and if there was somebody under, they'd be kind of sheltered. Again, like time and place, so maybe don't fly during recess, fly between recess, whatever. So they can use all these strategies. There's no prescriptive method there. But the goal is just avoid flying over people. And so we know that's not really tenable for DFR, where you're responding to calls for service. You don't have that luxury. But again, this is just kind of one option if you're doing more of like a fixed site deployment. In this case, it's schools, but jails as well, different types of sites where maybe you're just concerned with responding to events, at that property. So then the next thing, and still under Part 107 here, would be to add a parachute recovery system or some other way of mitigating the energy of the drone as it comes down. And so we are developing an attachment for X10 that will enable operations in Category 3 of Part 107. So that would allow momentary flight over people and moving vehicles. And so again, I mentioned the Pasco County approval, it's really just a stepping stone for them. So they're able to do response at their schools, at least for now, and then when the parachute recovery system comes online, we expect that approval to expand to kind of a full county deployment. And then for NYPD, the path there is actually operating under a COA. So COAs allow operations over human beings when necessary to safeguard human life. And so that's kind of the exact words that the FAA uses. Gets into technicalities here a little bit, but Part 91, unlike Part 107, actually doesn't prohibit flight over people. So it doesn't expressly prohibit that. The set of regulations was designed more for crewed aircraft flying at higher altitudes, and they had airworthiness certificates. So flying over people was really not a consideration when Part 91 was originally developed. But it does prohibit you from flying below 500 feet unless you have a safe area to land. So it's just technicalities, but it's kind of a different approach. So because Part 91 doesn't prohibit you from flying over people, the FAA has kind of chosen to compromise on this a little bit. So it's not a carte blanche approval to fly over people all the time or like large gatherings of people. So the COAs even prohibit some of those types of things. But they understand that there are certain calls for service, the benefit of getting to that call and helping people, potentially saving their lives, just outweighs the risk of flying over a person or a moving vehicle on the way to get there. So, they've recognized that and kind of found a balance. So when you need to under this COA and for New York City, when they need to, they're able to just respond to the call for service and fly over our people and just kind of accept that risk along the way. Okay, so yeah, so that's kind of a deeper dive into like the safety case for both these approvals, and those two things combined have really created these paths forward for doing drones first responder without VOs. And so this next slide here is a little bit of an eye chart, but it really just kind of shows these pathways opening up now. So on the top line, at least, that really represents the NYPD approval and sort of the precedent and the blueprint that sets for other agencies moving forward. So you have the ability to fly, shielded DFR operations with ADS-B only to do DFR, or if you have the need to fly over 200 feet, it gives the ability to add an airspace awareness technology to do that. And then for waivers, so Part 107, we have basically the Pasco County approval where you can do shielded DFR operations with a parachute. That kind of gives you full ability to do a citywide or countywide deployment without it. It's more fixed site. And then I don't have enough time really to kind of dive into it today, but there also is now a second waiver option called Public Safety Organization Shielded Ops. And what the FAA is doing for that type of approval is kind of expanding tactical BVLOS into Part 107. So happy to talk to anybody after this about that, but just kind of running out of time today to hit them all. All right. Okay. And so these pathways are now kind of opening up, and we're really excited to keep working with these two agencies to make sure these safety cases are effective. We made the right assumptions along the way, but we're also not done yet. So like the work isn't done just because we got the VO removed for one COA. So we're going to continue to climb this summit, the autonomous summit here. The things that are kind of on our mind in the future are certainly enabling that multi-mission operation, the DFR command demo you saw yesterday. We call that one-to-many, but yeah, our minds are certainly on unlocking that, so giving agencies the ability to fly multiple drones simultaneously to respond to calls, whether that's doing like an on-station handoff or possibly responding to more than one call at one time in the future. It's also the zero grids, what we call them, but essentially flying in those areas close to the airports. So if you remember back to the graphic with New York City, the only areas they can't really fly today, at least routinely, are right around those major airports. So we're going to be working on ways to get approvals to fly in those areas so they have kind of full coverage of their city or other metropolitan areas for other agencies. And then there could be more after that. So we're going to keep climbing, keep working on this. But yeah, that's what I've got for today. And I think we've got maybe 5-6 minutes for questions here. So we'll take some audience questions first. Yeah. Tommy will run over with the mic.
Hey, Jackie, I could have texted you this, but I figured I'd put you on the spot. So first question, are you guys starting with a two-to-many approach or going straight to one?
Two or one? Sorry.
Two to many versus one to many. So there was some feedback we got a while back that just on the multi-rotor type op side, so way more your world, that a two to many approach initially would make a little bit more sense to get off the ground, because if you have a 10 nominal operations going on at once and then an emergency, the second pilot can take care of the emergency while the other 9 flights are still being monitored. So are you guys going to start with a two to many, or are you going to go straight to a kind of a 1 to X approach?
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think our approach is more the latter. So 1 to many, right? So so we believe that with autonomy, really, we can kind of solve a lot of those contingency situations. I think we'll start initially with like a low number. So we're not going to go straight to like 100 or the drone light show types of numbers. But we think one pilot flying 2 drones maybe is a good first step, right? Just doing like an on-station handoff, because some calls for service last more than the 30 minutes of a battery life, right? So if we can give that capability where you can just launch a second drone, do a handoff, that first drone comes back, that's a good first step. And then maybe we'll just kind of expand that from there. But yeah, we believe the autonomy side of it's key to just handling some of those contingency things without needing more pilots.
Got it. And as a non-related follow-up, any plans to type certify the X10?
Not today.
Got it. Thanks. Thanks, Jakey.
Who else has questions?
So in reference to your 50 feet off, 100 feet over, is that pre-established? Is that being enforced? How are you tracking violations of that? Like, what's that look like?
Like the 50 feet over structures is kind of what you're thinking about?
Yeah. Like, is that just pilot, hey, fly that way? Or is that actually hard-coded in like a geofence type solution?
I see. Yeah. So, right. So it's 200 feet AGL, just kind of broadly. And then, if you need to get over 200 feet to clear an obstacle or something like that, today it's based on the pilot, and so they're increasing altitude and taking actions. We are working on some things to make that easier, bringing in like terrain data, building data. I think you saw what we call Pathfinder, where the drone's kind of navigating through an urban canyon like that. So we're working on some things to just make that easier and easier. And more automated, but today it's just pilots,
Where'd you go?
Hello, Jakey. Just kind of tagging along that question. As part of those waivers, does the FAA audit the data from all those calls, the BVLOS calls, kind of then go back and issue a violation or something?
So for NYPD particularly, there are some record keeping and reporting requirements because it is a new thing. It really represents a major step forward for the FAA, and typically when they do that, they want to have kind of a feedback loop, like I mentioned. So are things going well? Is there anything, any safety things that we didn't think about? Are your mitigations working? So for them, there's going to be a feedback loop. So we're going to do some reporting back on certain things related to like how many aircraft did you avoid, during your operations, or how many connectivity issues did you have, things like that. So it's not really an audit. There's just a feedback loop there because the FAA wants to learn as well. But to the question of if is there some kind of monitoring system going on where they're looking for violations, that's really not the FAA's kind of mentality around things. I think they'd rather learn and just have those discussions with operators versus just this monitoring and like violate them the minute they fly over 50 feet. It's really a partnership. I mean, to just put a cap on it. So. FAA, New York City Police Department, and us, they really view it as just a partnership to take this step forward. And, let's make sure it's safe, and then let's scale it out.
Thanks. My question is regarding patrol-led DFR, where a patrol officer brings out the drone and it's controlled remotely, and the assumption the officers on the scene then become the visual observers. My question is, how strict is it that the visual observers are being visual observers and not police officers, right? That they've launched it, they become focused on the bad guy, and nobody's really looking at the sky. Can you just talk about what kind of the regulations, the expectation is of the visual observers during patrol-led DFR?
Yep. The expectation is that they've received some training, what their duties are, their role, phraseology, how to scan airspace, things they can do to help the pilot. So their expectation is there's some training there, and then even the words kind of out of the COA are that it's a dedicated visual observer. So there's certainly an expectation that they are scanning airspace and acting as a member of the flight crew, and not getting too distracted with other duties. And we recognize, that is a hurdle, right, to like implementing a patrol-led DFR. Like, can you really take a guy out of this situation to kind of stand and scan airspace? So the ideal situation is, just like these two path forwards, we just figure out ways to remove that requirement using other technology like ADSB. So that's our ultimate goal, is to get rid of the need for that requirement, even with patrol-led DFR, for that reason. Yeah.
My question kind of goes in line with the gentleman in front there. You had mentioned that the FAA is always trying to learn, and I'm curious, as are a lot of other agencies, and speaking to people around here, like why the FAA chose for their first no VO DFR COA to be at like one of the most complex airspace areas in the country. It was a little shocking. So do you have any info on that?
Yeah, I mean, so it's something we've been working on a long time, actually. So this didn't kind of just materialize overnight. So it took over a year of just working with them. NYPD's been doing operations with a visual observer for a long time. So there's been plenty of operations going on. There's some level of trust and professionalism with an agency like New York, that they're doing it right. And then I think it kind of goes back to like the safety case. So I'll just say it again. It's counterintuitive, but it's not as crazy of an airspace as it might just kind of seem on the surface when you look down. So there really aren't aircraft just kind of all over the place flying at 200 feet AGL. All the aircraft there are cooperative, so we see them all with ADSB, and we can take maneuvers, give right away if we need to. So I think it might be a little bit counterintuitive, but it's actually, the safety case we put together seemed safe. So yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
You want to take maybe one from the virtual audience?
Sure. Yeah. Okay, gotta refresh. Okay, sorry, just reading, but So one question, what was it difficult to get the 107.3.31 waiver? So the Pasco County waiver. So, I mean, there's sort of two answers to this. So there's work that has to be done to get the first one. So, for Pasco County, there was certainly some work done to get that, kind of first precedent-setting approval, and work with the FAA on the safety case of that. Like I said, there's a lot of work that went into the New York City Police Department approval. Took over a year to work with them on that. So yeah, the sort of the first time through, it is a little bit more difficult, but then the idea is that sets precedent, and as long as the operations, for Pasco, for New York City, are safe, and there's that like feedback loop that I mentioned, so they're gonna have to report back, are things going well? As long as everything goes well, and that gives the FAA, kind of confidence to approve it the next time with a shorter timeline. So is the next one that hard to get as the first one? Usually not. But it is, it's part of our responsibility, part of the operator's responsibility to continue operating safely. You get these waivers, but there are provisions, and so make sure they understand it all and continue to operate safely, so that we can make it easy to get the next one, so to speak. And there was one other one, so related to ADSB. So the question is kind of, how are you planning to make that functional, fully automatic? So I kind of interpret it to mean like an autonomous avoidance maneuver, is sort of how I interpret that question. So it goes a little bit back to, it's kind of talking about not every low-flying aircraft nearby requires an avoidance maneuver. We've been a little careful to implement autonomous and like autonomous avoidance things because we don't want to create situations where the drone is autonomously avoiding something it didn't need to, because that creates risk as well. So imagine if you had to, your drone just suddenly descended and there's a helicopter flying overhead, but that helicopter was, turns at the last minute and it's not a factor. So there's enough situations where we think with the right training and just kind of the way that we've developed remote flight deck and the alerting and the information that's presented, we think the pilot is going to make the best decisions for now. We are thinking about adding automatic avoidance in the future, but just as a kind of a simple way to get started and not add extra risk by kind of unnecessary maneuvers. That's where we wanted to start at least. So yeah, I think that's it. So yeah, I guess I'll just kind of wrap up. I mean, thanks everybody for coming and sticking around. And I hope you have all safe travels home. And if you do have questions, I'll be around for a little bit more. I'm going to kind of wander over to the program manager training, but I'll be in the lobby, so happy to talk more. So thank you all.